right, I'm Laura,
And I'm David.
and welcome to Happily
Happily
Ever
ever after.
After. We're so excited that you're joining us for this episode. And today we want to talk about how two people who are independent, wonderful, and beautiful come together and work together to put on a beautiful wedding and then a marriage.
And what it takes, we will find out, or you will find out, that there are two people in a marriage, and each person is different. Both persons have their own way of doing things, and that's what we're going to discuss today.
As you know, David and I got engaged on New Year's Eve 2019. And we were very excited, and we had almost made all of our wedding plans for 2020. We had a venue, I had picked out a dress, we had scheduled a rehearsal dinner, we had a photographer, we had a photo booth, we had music, and then the pandemic hit and we had to start all over again. But even in that, all those decisions we made, it was a lot of work because, like David just said, we're each very different. But it wasn't as hard as rescheduling everything because we had to start all over again. And then what made it especially difficult was that we wanted to make sure everyone was safe due to COVID.
And that's correct. We had to scale down everything to a smaller wedding. We had to cancel hotel reservations. We had to cancel our rehearsal dinner. We even had to cancel out of our venue. It took a lot of work. And all of that work, all of the preliminary work toward a wedding can cause a lot of stress, but it all of the work will demonstrate how well the couple maybe proceeding forward into marriage, how well the couple will work together.
And there was the added stress because we had to come up with COVID safety guidelines for our wedding.
That's correct, yes. And so our wedding was scaled down to 20 people.
And that included the officiant, the photographer, the woman who did the dance, and the DJ, and at least one other person. And David and I. So we only could invite about 15 people.
Correct. So one of the things that a couple will discover is frustration when you're trying to coordinate. Let's take, for instance, trying to coordinate hotel reservation, hotel rooms for people who are coming from out of town. Well, you have to coordinate with the person in charge at the hotel. That takes a lot of telephone calls. You have to actually go to the hotel and look at the rooms.
And then we also, once we had our venue, we had to make sure the hotels were within reasonable proximity of our venue. And then we had to make sure transportation was taken care of and that the venue had adequate parking. And sometimes people choose venues where their guests have to pay for parking. And that's not something we wanted. And we had a number of people who had mobility issues. So we also chose a venue that would be easy access for our guests and even coming into the venue and while at the venue. So that was a consideration. So when you're planning a wedding, you have to think, who's coming. And David and I are a mature couple. So a lot of the people that were coming were our age and even older. We had very few young people. So we had to think about that when choosing a venue. And even when we switched it to our home or to David's home, we really had to think about the logistics of making sure people with mobility issues could easily navigate being in our wedding.
Yes, and all of these smaller details were extremely important. And so there was a lot of frustration uh, trying to initially obtain hotel rooms, and then the added frustration of canceling hotel rooms. So it takes a lot of patience in your planning, a lot of patience and legwork when you have to go to different places. You have to pay for gas. It's an added expense in the budget. So it's things like this that can make or break a couple.
And what's so wonderful about David and I is that we had a planning notebook. So I bought some wedding planning books, and they were helpful. But David, every detail, David made copies of, put holes in it, and put it in a binder. So we were able to keep up with all of our contracts, all of our contacts, all the details. Now, he didn't have any of the details about my dress. That was a secret. I had to keep up with that. But that way, when everything kind of exploded, we were able to go back and make those adjustments, and it was tough. But moving forward, because we had done that, we had to figure out, like I said, where to have it. Once we decided to have it here, we had to decide about the food and how to handle COVID. So we had COVID instructions for the restrooms. We had, and I had a beautiful, I'm kind of going forward, I had a gift bag. So everyone had a gift bag, and in the gift bag, there were masks, handmade face shields, tissues, fans, because we got married in August. And that was funny because we had to figure out what time of day to have it and
Yes.
how the shade. Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
we even, and we're talking about details now,
Yes.
which can cause a lot of impatience and frustration. We actually went into the backyard to time when the sun would set and what amount of area of the lawn would be shaded. So we even looked or explored those details.
Because we didn't rent a tent because David has this big pine tree right smack in the dab in the middle of the backyard. And then we had to make sure the photographer had enough light. So this is something that the venue we had, all of that would have been taken care of for us. But if we had not gone through some of these details with the venue and our photographer, and if you haven't seen our video or the video with Ryan, our photographer, he really helped us with that. Pastor Valerie Pearson, our officiant, she was very helpful with that as well because she had done many weddings. But Ryan really helped us, and we would go out every day and say, okay, this is when the sun is set. This is how much time. And then it rained really hard the day before our wedding. And so everything was a little soggy. And my parents, we had special chairs for my parents because they have mobility issues. So they needed chairs with arms, but their chairs were heavier. And during our ceremony, during our vows, I hear all this noise in the background. I'm like, don't turn around, don't turn around, don't turn around, because, this is being filmed. And my aunt in Vegas is calling and saying, you're sinking, so all this stuff was going on.
Meaning
in the background.
Her parents were in their chairs sinking into the ground, right, in the grass because it was wet.
Because it was
we didn't realize how wet the grass was.
Because it had stormed the day before, just like it stormed earlier today when we were at an event. So all these things, even though we planned everything, my parents stole the show for a few minutes, but that was okay. But the thing is, even though it was frustrating, even though there were things that happened that were beyond our control, it was still a beautiful wedding. Now, how does that play out in a marriage? It plays out in the sense that, as we've talked about before, communication is so important. Realistic expectations, as shared with my brother when he was here in his episode, that he was here with me, conflict resolution. All of these things are important. Now, the one last thing I'll share about the wedding, due to COVID is that we were very concerned about food, because food is a big deal. So we managed to work with a local restaurant, and we had individually packed food, and we had individual silverware, and the drinks were individual. So even down to the food and the spacing of where people sat, that was also very important to make sure our guests were safe, because the wedding was our celebration and the bride is the brightest star. But you want to make sure your guests are safe and comfortable and welcome, because they're sharing that special day with you.
And that was a lot of detailed planning with the food because we called several restaurants and we decided on a particular one. And we were even able to get a military discount. Those are the kind of things you want to try to include in your planning. If you have like a teacher's discount or a AAA discount or AARP
Discount. That's right.
you want to try to save money any way you can. But even trying to order the food, that became a project in itself.
Right.
And there were a lot of details. Uh, there were even details of me talking with a regional manager of the restaurant who was located in Dallas, Texas, about ordering the food and discounts we were supposed to get. And so, again, it took a lot of patience
Right.
and coordination. And both persons, Laura and I, we had to be on the same page
Right.
with everything that we were doing.
And so that is so important in the wedding, and how much more important that is for the marriage, being on the same page. Because as David said earlier, people can be totally different. And one area in which we were very different was how we keep the kitchen. And I laugh because it's the little things that can drive you crazy. So David, can you share with our viewers what some of the issues are or were between us?
Well, like cleaning the kitchen, for instance, Laura likes to use a towel. I like to use a scrubber. And that's a difference in between us with washing dishes. And she has her way of doing things and how things are placed in cabinets or uh, just small detailed things about keeping the kitchen clean. We both had to come to a compromise of how we were going to work together.
So let me just break it down to you, because he's being all nice and political. Okay, this is the scoop. You want to know the scoop? This is the scoop. So first of all, David and I cook together, or we take turns cooking. And so that was another thing we had to really agree on. And we really love each other, so that was really easy. But what would drive how we drove each other crazy were the little things. So David likes to clean dishes as he goes. And every time,
as what she means is, as I cook, and if I use a dish and I'm done with it, I'll clean it because I don't like a lot of dishes after I cook. I don't like all that on the countertop as I cook. I like to use it, clean it, and put it in the dish rack.
So that drove me crazy because he doesn't use a wash basin. Now he has one, but I don't know what he did with it before we got married, because to me, as I'm cooking, I'm not the greatest cook, as we've already established, and I don't want to burn anything. So once I finish with something, I'll rinse it off or I'll sit it in the basin. And after everything's done, I'll, wash all the dishes. But with David, sometimes I'm cooking and I'll put something down and I'll go to get it and he's already washed it. I'm like, oh, I wasn't finished with that yet. So that was the one. And then I like to put the dishes in the dish rack and let them dry. No, he can't do that. He wants to dry the dishes and put them away immediately. So that was driving him crazy. And also, I'm the kind of person I can rinse the dishes and let them wait and wash them later. With David, no, you got to wash them right now. I'm like, ah. So the kitchen became a battleground. Not that one way was right or wrong. And then I was very used to a garbage disposal, and this is an older home, and David has not put in a garbage disposal, which is not the end of the world, but that means we have to do things differently. And David has a very unique way of using the dishwasher. You want to tell him what you do with the dishwasher, David?
Well, because we don't use a lot of dishes as we cook, um, I don't. We like to wash the dishes and put them in a dish rack, but we don't use the dishwasher. So what we do is store our freezer bags that have been washed and cleaned. We put them into the dishwasher to dry out.
Okay, let's stop right there. Yes, we reuse freezer bags. So I want to be really honest. Before I met David, I always thought it was kind of wasteful to use a freezer bag once and throw it away, unless you're dealing with like raw meat or chicken. I'm like, yeah, just throw it away because salmonella. But so David takes his bags and he washes them and he turns them inside out and he puts them in the dishwasher to dry. Now, sometimes I can't get all the soap out. So I let him do it because if not, whatever you eat next time is a little soap. But the key is that it's important to communicate with each other. And I always like to end our episodes talking about God. So, David, how can we bring God into, as couples are learning about each other? And we didn't even tell you about the war. Well, I'm not going to tell you that because that's another thing. But tell us, David, about how we bring God into this and what is the godly side of this?
Well, there are a couple of things. We talked about patience, and we have to talk about long suffering. And those are two of the fruit of the Spirit, as mentioned in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. So we have to have patience with our mate. Our mate may not do things the way that we do them. And so when they don't, we don't be critical of the way that they do things. If we can show them a different way of doing something to make life easier, then we can make a suggestion to our mate, and hopefully our mate won't take offense to that. But it takes patience to be with our mate, and long suffering, meaning if they don't do something, or if our mate continues to do things their way and they don't want to change, then we have to be able to endure that for a long period of time. So that's why I bring up patience and long suffering, as the Bible calls it.
But the thing key is if there are always red flags, and if a person is difficult to deal with or a person is unwilling to compromise, after you get married, that person probably won't change. And I think that is so important. Once again, I'm always emphasizing how important it is for each person to put God first and that God is the center of the relationship, because David doesn't complete me and I don't complete David. Only God completes us. We complement each other because there's parts of us that even the person who loves us the most can't touch, because that part is solely for God. And that's where that relationship with God comes in, and it's so important. So, the big thing is that you love God first, then that will allow you to love yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, you can't love anyone else. And then you love your spouse. And that's a beautiful relationship to have. So we hope that, even though you go through long suffering, even though you have to be patient, and even though I think David used the word frustrated at least 5 times, and you have battles over things like how to make the bed and where to put the towels in the bathroom, all these little things that, we're very particular about that you never think about when you're getting married. Those things happen, but that's all part of growing together. So our wedding anniversary is coming upon us. We still try to make up our mind what we're going to do. So we'll share with you guys eventually when we figure this out. But for right now, this is Laura
and David.
And thank you for joining us for Happily Ever After. See you next time.
Next time.
Bye.
Bye.